Welcome to the Religious Treehouse,
Oh, I am your co-host Matthew.
and I'm your other co-host, Jodie.
Oh, so excited for today's episode. It's going to be a good one. What have you been up to lately, though, before we get started?
I'm gonna go see Taylor Swift, and
Ooh,
everyone else is gonna be jealous, and I'm just going to go and have a religious experience. What are you gonna be
yeah.
up to?
I am actually going to Texas to visit your family while you and your family go to Taylor Swift. So I'm excited for that. I'm excited to dog sit for all of your dogs and whatnot. So it'll be great.
And we are so grateful for you for doing this so that way we may experience magic.
Of course, of course. Plus, I get to visit Texas. Never been there before. So it'll be fun.
Before we get started, I've pulled a card. I'm not really vibing with this. We'll give it another shot next week. But we get Moonstone, live your purpose.
Means live your purpose.
I think we kind of like
Yeah,
that.
we'll live our purpose. We'll see how that, because this week we're talking about the first creation narrative in Genesis 1, and people are living, and we're living our purpose, I guess. So yeah, I like it. Oh, awesome. Do you want to give us a summary before we get into the weeds?
In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. On day one, there was light, and he said, "That's chill." On day two, he made a dome slash firmament, and he said, "That's cool." On day three, he said, "May there be dry land and plants." And he said, "Dab on the haters." And day four, he put lights in the heavens. And he said, and day five, he created fish and birds. And he said, "All right now." On day six, land creatures and humans. And he said, "Super dope." And on day seven, he said, "I'm tired. I'm a rest."
Classic. Classic. How we think of this story.
We need
Um,
to put that out there.
and
People need to know the good word.
Sure, yeah. Like, we got to the point and we got there quickly. The new Genesis one. But yeah, let's get into it. Let's get into my first critique of your summary, which started with
The heavens and the earth. Or
uh,
light.
no, it started with in the beginning, which is
Oh, in the
wrong,
beginning.
Jody. Wrong. It's not in the beginning. Oh, see, this is so fun because like everyone like thinks of the Bible as like in the beginning. That's like the classic how the Bible started. But I, along with most scholars, argue that is a bad translation. So what a good way to get started into this conversation with the first word of the Bible. Um, so the word there in Hebrew is bereshit, which, if we just take that one word, it would mean in a beginning, but it's in construct with the rest of that phrase, um, which means it denotes the beginning of something. So a much better translation that most scholars would agree is when God began creating, which may not seem like a big difference at first if we're just kind of like thinking about it. But if we start with in the beginning, it's this notion of like, hey, there's nothing here yet. But like that, we don't see that following either. There's this idea of um, chaos waters and stuff like that, which is already pre-existing, and it makes much more sense and much more grammatical sense in the Hebrew when it starts with when God began creating. Um, which a big point of contention for Christians if like, oh, everything's created ex nihilo, but that might not exactly be what's saying here. Is that track? We
Yeah,
making
that's
sense?
so yeah, because there's like five different kinds of creation myths. So ex nihilo is what it's been reported as, but you're saying it's more creation from chaos. Like, there was a base thing, and then he started world building like on The Sims. He was like, I'm gonna start adding some of this here to what's already here.
Yeah, yeah. Like there's not. Um, I don't know the terminologies for all the myriads of different forms of creation. But I'd argue that Genesis 1:1 doesn't present, creation out of nothing.
Okay.
Like if we can read, was the MRSV translation? When God began to create the heavens and the earth was complete chaos. Darkness covered the face of the deep. So like there's a face of the deep, whatever that is, that's pre-existing before in the beginning. So yeah, like the idea of creation out of nothing is not necessarily a biblical idea. It's been imposed onto the biblical text from a much later period.
Okay. So then there was something there, like primordial ooze. Oh, I did write down darkness fell on the face of the deep because to me, like the deep is like it's insinuating that something is there that is deep. I don't know if that makes
Mhm.
any sense, but there's an existence of something. So I agree with you that like
Mhm.
it more feels from chaos than from nothing. Um, and are we just aliens here to take over a long lost civilization? What if the thing that was here
Yeah,
before?
no, that's a question. Aliens, not really sure if the Bible addresses that. Not really. Oh, people will make the claim, when we get to Ezekiel and stuff like that. But I'm not too sure if we can put Bibles or put aliens into the Bible. That might be a a little extra, but a question worth considering, of course.
I mean,
Uh,
it is the height of hubris to be like that we are the most intelligent beings and we've always been the most intelligent beings. Like, I am very comfortable with saying that there is something out there that is smarter than us, that has maybe visited before, or at least gotten close enough to roll down the windshield, look out, and be like, no, let's go to the next rest stop. You know?
sure. You know, I'd like to think of myself as being open-minded, so I guess I'll allow that as a potential solution to something. Um, but yeah, to get to your earlier claim before we, devolved into the topics of aliens, um, which actually, I'm trying to get back on topic here, but we're just going to go off onto another tangent. I read a book a few months ago by Jeffrey Kripal, I think. I don't remember his name. But he worked with this guy who's like known for like UFO and like magical mysterious things. The weirdest book on like religious studies that I've ever read, but it was like so fascinating and interesting. It was like called Supernatural or something. And it's like maybe aliens are just like religion misunderstood. And it was so weird, but I recommend it. It was a fun read.
Okay. It's going on my
Something,
Christmas list.
something worth considering.
He's on the same wavelength as I am. I just need to find my people.
Yeah, no, it was weird because like in the introduction they're like marketing towards like the people, and they're like most of you are probably reading this because you've heard of like this alien person who like talks about aliens and stuff. I've like never heard of him, but like I knew the religious studies guy. So it was a read. Anyways, back on topic, back to what you were first saying
Yes.
about the face of the deep. Like the idea of like chaos waters, of like water as being this chaotic agent that signifies, oh, something spooky's going on, is very common in ancient Near Eastern uh, creation myths. Like the idea of water being chaotic is very common. Perhaps seen most in like the Enuma Elish, which is the go-to Babylonian creation myth. Um, so in there, it's this much bigger depiction of like the gods and like this war type thing. And there's an ancient sea monster called Tiamat, and eventually the gods kill Tiamat and like split his body into two, and like spreads it out, and that's how we get like the domes of the water above, which we'll get into like in a few verses. Um, and then we also get like the rest of his body being the waters below. So it's this, ancient war between gods of creating water and chaos. So water is a bad guy in a lot of these myths.
Do we think the mistranslation is like done purposefully to kind of like separate themselves? Because I mean, I at least the Christian religion, I would say, kind of heralds itself as being like a non-violent, and some people think of chaos as being violent, but I don't think chaos is inherently violent. I think it's just chaos. It just is.
What part are we thinking of? Are
Like,
we calling a mistranslation?
well, you were saying that it's not in the beginning because that is implies that from nothing the world was created.
Yeah.
Like, what was the purpose of separating yourself from the fact that it is a chaos creation story? I'm just wondering if,
Yeah, I think I'm slightly speculating here, but to translate it as in the beginning isn't necessarily wrong. Like you could make an argument that it should be in the beginning. It's just not a very good argument. Um, so uh, you might be able to make the argument, a better argument that it says in a beginning. Um, but it makes much more sense grammatically and in the story following for it to be when God began creating. But I think we can tie this back to the King James version and other translations around that time where that's how they translated it. And it's not because they were dumb, they didn't know the correct way to translate it. It's just that was the way that made sense for them. And there might have been some theological implications in that specific translation. But because of the King James Version being so influential, like there's so many phrases throughout the King James Version that like it's impossible not to like read back into like the Bible, like when you're translating it, because it's just like second nature. Like in the beginning is how the Bible starts because that's how the King James Version translated it. So I think things like that are just so ingrained into us, and that's what causes the tension when people are like, "No, it must say in the beginning," because to them that is the way the Bible should be translated. And if we mess that up a little bit, it's scary. What else is different and bad? And so I think that's more so the problem rather than an intentional theological claim being put into the text. So there might be some of that as well.
well, yeah, because I think like with the King James version, especially, I um, think of the fact like what kind of influences were in there when they were translating. Like I'm sure there's other parts that may be a mistranslation, but we can have an episode on translation later, and I won't get into it super heavy, but I don't know. You have to wonder if there was an agenda somewhere along the line to like
Mm-hmm.
make things be presented in a certain way in order
Yeah.
to soothe or assuage the masses. Although I would have thought we would have thrown the King James Version in the body of water with the tea. My gosh, where was it? You know what I'm saying,
The
though.
the Boston Tea Party, the
I can't
Boston Tea
remember.
Party.
It was
Yeah,
the Boston Tea Party. I know that. Were they in a gulf? Were they in
it was the Boston Harbor.
harbor? It was a harbor. I think it would have been the Bibles would have been thrown in the harbor with the tea. There we go.
Yeah,
We got
there we go.
there.
Actually, so like the original like King James translations had the Apocrypha in them as well for the most part. And then one of the main reasons why like Protestants in like America especially like doesn't have the Apocrypha and stuff like that in the Bible is part of that's because they're trying to distance themselves, and like Luther was like, no, that's like scary and like it's beautiful, but not like the word of God or whatever. I don't know. I'm not an expert on that, but the primary reason they're not like in Bibles in Protestant evangelical Bibles anymore is because if we took that chunk out, it was a whole lot cheaper to print. Um, so you know, just the history of what people have done in America in the past with their Bibles. It's a fun history. It's a fun story.
We come to this land for religious freedom and censorship.
I don't think it was censorship. It was just, a good financial decision.
I mean, I guess, but to cutting it down to what you want because it's going to cost a few extra shillings. Anyways, I digress. So, God created from chaos.
Right, right, right. Oh, and we get this wonderful phrase, of wild and waste, of Merck and Meyer, of what is NRC translated as? Uh, Earth was complete chaos. Is that how they translated it? I don't know. But this phrase tohu wavohu, um, like it's such a fun phrase to say, and I like words like that in this story imply to me, along with others, that this is like such tight prose. Like it's not quite poetry, but it's like very intentional prose that's so beautifully like intertwined and like uses this like poetic type language. Uh, I think it's just fun. Tohu wabohu. Say it. Tohu wabohu.
Tohu wovohu.
Oh, a fun word. So good. Um, but yeah, and then the other thing, I think we're still in verse 1 and 2. Uh, is that oftentimes we get this Holy Spirit idea of the Spirit hovering over the waters, and Christians like to say that was the Holy Spirit. Again, that was a much later theology imposed by Christians onto this text. Like the idea of this being the Holy Spirit is not, anywhere in the Old Testament by the writers. So, reading that as the Holy Spirit rather than a spirit hovering over the waters, I think is, you know, wrong.
Perhaps an agenda.
Not everything's an agenda, Jodie.
Perhaps. Mayhaps fine. It could have been done on accident with the best of intentions. Ooh,
It's not always an agenda.
but the wind spirit slash breath of God that was hovering over the waters is feminine?
It's so the word. Oh, I left my Hebrew Bible in another room.
Oh no.
Um, but the word there is oh my goodness, ruach, the breath, literally. Oh my goodness, I should know this, but the word is usually considered feminine in um in Hebrew because like most languages other than English, words have a masculine or feminine ending, and the word there is often feminine. That's not like attributing gender to whatever that spirit was hovering over the face, but like it's just a fun thing to note.
I think it's cool, but I may also have an agenda.
See, some things are an agenda.
Everything I say. Okay, so day one, he begins creating and he makes light. He said, turn the lights on in
Light,
this.
yeah, separating light from darkness. And then okay, we get our first instance of and it was evening and it was morning. It was the first day, and that's I think a good time to mention now how like so many Jewish holidays start at sundown. Like Sabbath does, often we think of it as Saturday, but the Sabbath starts Friday at sundown and goes until Saturday at sundown. And we see that tradition going back even to this text, um, evening starting at sundown as opposed to at midnight, how we would normally do it nowadays. Um, oh, I don't think we mentioned. So this text likely was written maybe 6th or 5th centuries BCE. So probably post exilic. Um, but that's just, we'll get into what that means later. But this story was written likely after Genesis 2 and 3. So this also has some influence from Genesis 2 and
Ew.
3. Um, and we'll talk more about that next week, I'm sure. Um, but yeah,
So,
we're creating light and day, and we're starting this separation of days 1, 2, and 3. We have light and darkness that we're separating, and we're creating these spaces, these areas for the creations on day 4, 5, and 6 to inhabit. So it's this very ordered, very structured, again, very poetic um, way of formatting the creation of the universe, which again implies that this is not a historic account. This is a very poetic reading that's creating meaning and story and not giving us a history lesson.
so never mind. I'll wait. I'll wait till it's here. Wait till it's here, Jodie. Um, but when you're talking about the day starting at sundown, it reminded me, I need you to watch the show Nobody Wants This. It's with Kristen Bell and Adam Brody, but he plays a rabbi. And Kristen Bell's Shiksa character goes over to his house to celebrate Sabbath, and they stand outside and they look at the sky. And what their family does is wait until they see 3 stars in the sky, and that's how they determine
Mm,
once sundown has happened. And
yeah, no,
it
there's
very beautiful.
mhm. Yeah, no, there's, and it's, because rabbinic tradition like has so many different ways to like figure that out. Because like, what happens if you're like up in Alaska when it's like sunlight like the whole time? So there's so many different ways like for people who celebrate Sabbath and other holidays like all around the world to like figure out when is sundown, when like the sun doesn't go down and stuff like that. But yeah,
I
it's
didn't
interesting. But this written for a very centralized audience and like a very centralized location doesn't really have that to worry about yet.
I didn't even think about Alaska. Oh, I have so many questions.
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, so he created day and he saw it was good.
Mhm. Yeah, it was good.
It was good.
God's like, good job. You did well.
Yay me.
Yeah.
So then are we good to go to day 2?
I'm good to go to day 2.
So he created a dome slash firmament, and I remember being, I forget what I was on, but I was reading these gentlemen argue over the fact that dome could be used to prove flat earth
Mhm.
because it's only a half.
Yeah.
Thoughts?
Oh, so yeah, what we have here is the creation of the firmament, sometimes translated as dome. And so what that essentially is this like solid barrier between, the waters below and the waters above. Because in this cosmology, like why does water come from the sky? It's because we've got like this barrier separating this blue sky, and then sometimes it opens up. We see that in the flood story with Noah. Sometimes it opens up and water comes down. Um, but like we need to differentiate reality and what the Bible claims. This isn't a history lesson. This isn't a science lesson. Likely, the biblical authors considered this as a potentiality. Like, why would they consider the Earth to be flat? So, even though this indicates that the Earth could be flat, it doesn't mean the Earth is flat. Um, and I'm not saying for all my you know fundamentalists out there. I'm not saying the Bible's not true. I'm saying that this is a different genre than history and science. This is creating meaning, not telling history. So yeah, the Bible here in Genesis indicates that the Earth is flat, but that is not making a claim on reality. My claim on reality is that the Earth is round. And I know that's a bold statement. Jodie, are you okay with the official statement of this podcast going out as the Earth is a globe? Are you okay with that?
I'm very okay with that, and I have a very specific reason why. You go to
Oh,
Epcot and there's a giant ball. It's called Spaceship Earth, but everyone calls it the Epcot ball. It's not a ball, people. Breaking news. It's a dome with an undercarriage. And that may very well be what these guys were meaning. They said firmament, but they forgot to add their little asterisk like with an undercarriage. It was an oversight. It was lost in translation years ago. But yes,
sure, sure.
the official statement is the
Okay,
Earth is round.
okay, good. We'll go with that. We'll keep that as our official statement, and we won't get into the reasons for why.
Okay. Okay, so it was
As
used
if
to
Disney doesn't have an agenda.
so it was used to separate the waters from the heavens and the earth. We have atmosphere. Yay! Very important.
Atmosphere. Cool.
Atmosphere.
Oh,
Oh, so it doesn't say God said and it was so. It says God said and then made, unlike light. That's a note I'm seeing.
yeah. We kind of have like a different order of verse 3 we said we have and God said let there be light and there was light. And God saw the light was good. And over here we have um, no donation of it being good per se.
What?
Yeah. Is that am I reading my translation right? Hold up.
I don't know because I think atmosphere is
Yeah,
good.
we don't mention that it being good.
Wow.
Yeah. Unless I translated that wrong. Let me go to a better translation than mine.
I
No, we
think we
skip it. It's not good. The atmosphere, bad, Jody. We did not say it was good.
I think I need to redo the summary because that is not how I did it. All right. Well then.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. I that might be something worth looking into, but maybe not something I ever, consciously noticed before. So yeah, right now I have no comment.
So that day ends and we get an evening and a morning. Yes.
Evening and morning, yep, and we
Evening
go
and
on to day
morning.
3.
And he said dry land and plants.
Yeehaw!
One may say
We have Earth.
Pangea.
Oh my goodness, this isn't a history book. This isn't a science book. Come on, Jody, we've been over this.
I'm just saying, there was at one point one big mass of land.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I'll give you that. Coincidences happen, but I love how this interpretation, it just like makes everyone unhappy. It makes the young Earth creationists unhappy because it implies that millions of years ago there was like this centralized landmass, and then it makes people like me unhappy because they're trying to like impose this science into like a poetic story. It just makes everyone unhappy, Jody. Come on.
I love making people unhappy, especially with this weird coinky dink. Like, because that is what it is. It's a coincidence. Because they couldn't really tell. How we're able to tell or theorize, I'm still not understanding. I think it has to do with plate tectonics, and I was sick that day. So Um, but it kind of brought up to me,
Yeah.
like,
No.
how long was a day to God? Because, like, let's
Mm.
say a day was like so many, 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 many years, then Pangea. It fits. It fits so well, and I find that annoying.
Yeah, there's been some attempts by people trying to make sense of this, saying, well, it's not a day, it's just a day to God. What is a day to God? It could be thousands and thousands of years or something like that. I think it's Psalm 40, Psalm 90, Psalm 90. I'm going with that, saying something along the lines of, 1,000 years is a day to God, and a day is 1,000 years to God, something along those lines. And people have like tapped onto that. Um, but again, that's us trying to like impose this like scientific argument onto it. But no, Jodie, we're just it's day by day by day. We're
I
having his
promise you,
days here. We're ha-
I'm only doing this for day 3. So once day 3 is over, so is this. Because that is enough time for evolution to happen. Like that is just enough time. If we put the days into years. Evolution. Also need to know that he made all the plants. He made all the trees. Wink, wink, Eve. But also, if he made all the plants, does that not then say that nothing on this earth could be called the devil's whatever?
um First of all, to the wink wink Eve, like I think we should, address that these are two different sources being like spliced next to each other. We'll talk more about that next week, I'm sure. And secondly, that's an argument I've heard. I have heard people say, well, God made it and it was good. We have a good in this one. Um, so it's an argument that's been made, and there have been many arguments made against that as well. I am not going to comment on that right now. The official stance of this podcast is no comment.
I have a comment, but I'll keep it to myself because the official stance is no comment. But find me on TikTok.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, but this day got a good. He was like, land, plants, that's good.
Land plants, good. Yeah.
Great. We can move on to day 4.
Day four. Day four. And, okay, so here we have this, this switch where, we split everything's up. We split light from darkness. The waters above and below. We have the land split from the seas. We have plants doing their thing. And then here we have like to fill those spaces. So we have the lights in the heavens. And, on one point, we're like, okay, filling this out. We have suns and moons and stars and stuff. But I think this verse kind of gets more to the point of the historical cultural context of what's going on here. So if this was written in the 5th, 6th century BCE, this would be after the destruction of the temple, and therefore this centralized location, the centralized place of worship, has disappeared. It's gone. They no longer have a central place to do their cultic activities. Where now they have to create and emphasize a much more important religious time. Um, because we look at my translation that I did here. Um, Let there be lights in the dome of the heavens to separate between the day and between the night, and let them be to signify appointed times. So, the point of the stars and the moons and stuff isn't necessarily to denote days and stuff like that, but it's to set seasons and like specific holy days and holy rituals. So I think that's much more what this verse is getting at. And we see this again, in day 7, where, God rested in Sabbath, and we're creating again that holy time, the sacred time that we have to create. We have to, emphasize it's important if we don't have this cultic temple to worship at anymore.
Okay. So what I'm hearing is astrology king because, you know, the stars, they speak.
Yeah,
Yeah?
if you took that what I just said, okay.
No, no, sorry. My brain is processing because
Yeah.
I also heard this thing yesterday is that in medieval times they gave holidays to the peasants to keep them busy. And then when I think of like seasonal things, I think of holidays. But I understand this is supposed to be more of a religion respect, kind of celebrating the life we're given. And I
Mhm.
no, I think that those are very important. Especially because, you know, our lives are ruled by the seasons. They really are. Seasonal depression is a huge thing. That's not where I was meaning to go with this initially, but there's a time for everything. And the seasons even take on like a life of their own. Spring is the beginning, the the
Mhm.
birth, and then you get to summer and you're kind of in this childlike state where it's just very happy. And then you get to fall, that's like kind of aged. And then winter is death.
Sure, yeah.
I don't know. That's just no, I have to be really honest. I was really thinking about the fact that in medieval times they would use holidays to distract peasants.
Yeah, no, I don't think I've ever heard that
Yeah,
before.
I'll
Uh,
send you that TikTok.
okay, perfect. Yeah.
Send you that one.
But yeah, no,
So
the creation of holidays and stuff, throughout the Hebrew Bible, very interesting, very important. Still being practiced today by many a religious folk and many a non-religious folk.
sweeping the nation. And it definitely has
Yeah,
nothing to do with candy companies.
no. Candy companies, greeting card companies, they would never.
Capitalism does not have an influence.
It doesn't. No.
How dare.
Speaking of which, for the capitalists that like want to boost our podcast and stuff, we'll be on your side if you want us to. Yeah.
For the right
Uh,
amount.
yeah, for the right amount. Okay. We're moving on. What are we on? Day five? Day five.
This is a very
Right? Or
important day.
do you have anything else before
No,
we
but
move on to day
I
five?
want to know more about that temple. I feel like I really like why was that temple destroyed?
Oh yeah, that's important. Yeah, big important. We'll we'll get there. Um, big important. That's like we'll get there. I can't condense that down into a tangent because like the whole Hebrew Bible is like responding to that event in some way
Really?
or another.
So, okay,
Uh,
so that really does have an influence because like when you don't have a place to worship, you really kind of just have to accept that you're outdoors. And there's all these other things. I don't.
yeah, and things progress and Second Temple gets built and stuff like that. And there's kingdoms. We'll talk about that. We need
Okay.
to do like an overview of historic events and stuff. But the destruction of the first temple, King Solomon, he was like he built the temple and they did all the stuff, and the kings and they got kicked out of the northern kingdom, and they're like, oh, we got the southern kingdom, cool, that's fine, I guess that's what we got. And then they got taken over, and the temple gone, and they're like, oh, we're in exile. And then they got a second temple, and they're like, okay, this is chill, this is fine. And then they're like, we're making it work. It's not great, but we're making it work. Then it gets taken over again, but it doesn't get destroyed. And then you get it back and it's fine. And then we get into Jesus's time. And he's like, yeah, temple. And then Jesus dies. And then you get into the destruction of the temple and then all that again. And now we don't have a temple for the past 2,000 years. But that's a tangent. We'll get into that later. I said a lot of things, and that's not what we're talking about now. Oh, day five, fish and birds.
Important questions.
Yeah.
Does this include penguins, the dodo bird, sea monsters, giant squids, or fish, Loch Ness monster, kraken, Hydra, Leviathan, and Sirens. And actually, I'm not going to say that last one.
Okay. So we'll start with penguins, I guess, because that's the first one you said and the first one I remember. Um, I don't know if ancient, you know, ancient Israel knew of penguins. I can't think of a reason why they would have. So I'm going to say no. um, and for the sake of not going through every one of your list, I think because I think with penguins, you have an interesting point that like, oh, they're birds, and they have like wings and stuff, but they're also like kind of watery.
No.
Um, and we see this in a lot of the kosher laws in Leviticus. The idea of animals being unclean are often because they fit into two different categories. There's a great book by uh, Mary Douglas on purity and cleanliness, where we talk about how we see things as dirty if we can't like fit them into a category. They're dirty and monsters. We say, oh, that's bad. We can't have that. So I would think my gut says penguins are unclean and dirty because they kind of fit into both categories. But I am speculating here. I do not know that one.
I mean, that's
But to your point about sea monsters, yes, the sea monsters are included in this. We see this in um, verse 21, and God created the great sea monsters. And we have, further throughout the Bible, examples of these, such as the Leviathan, and perhaps this is a slight little nod to Tiamat, as I mentioned earlier. Um, but yeah, we're making, and remember, we have waters below and the waters above. So that would make sense that we have fishes and birds if we think that the waters above, birds are swimming through the waters above. So that explains why both of these are made on the same day. If that tracks.
yes.
We're making sense?
Yes. They're they are separated by a firmament.
Firmament. Yes. The firmament. We love the firmament.
We love
Well,
the firmament.
but God doesn't.
No. Okay. So he creates birds, he creates sea creatures. Does he say these are good?
Yeah, these are good. The only thing we don't get as good is the firmament and stuff like that for some reason, which is something that I should look into for funsies. Everything else is good except for humans. Humans are very good, and that's tomorrow, right? That's day 6. Shall we move into day 6?
Yes. Let's go to bed and wake up. Day 6. So he just wakes up and he's like, let's create humankind. It's ready.
Yeah. Well, I think technically God said, um, let's make living creatures and animals. And then God was like, let's also make humans. So
Oh.
God woke up, said, okay, let's make animals. Those are good. Now let's make humans too. For funsies. A little bonus active creature.
I would also make squirrels before humans. So I
Yeah.
get it. So, and I noticed in it says in our image. Like when he's referring to making the humans, he said, let's make them in our image. That seemed very plural.
Yeah, no. So, people have tried to make the argument like this is God using the royal we or stuff like that. But I think what's much more likely happening here is a reference to the divine council, where, God's got his homies up in wherever God lives, and he's like, hey, what's going on? Should we make this? Let's make this together. Where God is this, creator God who like creates this thing, these things, but God still has these secondary, not well, most likely secondary folks where that are still in God's council area. And we see this, referenced throughout the Hebrew Bible, the divine throne room. We see this in, we'll see this next week. We God uses us again. It's in Deuteronomy, perhaps most notably. Even like later or earlier things like Job, we see this divine council. So it's a common idea of there being a divine group of folks for God to hang out with.
Oh, I like that. That means he isn't lonely. No one should be lonely.
Yeah.
If you're listening to the podcast, reach out to a friend. So then he made man and woman at the same time in this creation story, which immediately makes my mind go, Lilith. But I understand that may not be the case.
Let's say more. Explain your thoughts.
Oh, no, that's just the way I've heard it. Like the way I've heard the argument for Lilith is that because of the two creation stories, since this one is listed first, even though it might have been written after, people are like, well, look here, God created man and woman at the same time. And then you get to the second story, Adam and Eve, and Adam's made solo, and then Eve is made of his side. And people are like, well, no, actually, Adam and Lilith were created at the same time, but she was too tempting. So she was sent out. And
Mm.
then God made Eve. That's just the way I've heard it.
Yeah. So what we have here, yeah. So like, I don't know how far back that tradition goes, but it's an attempt to harmonize the two creation accounts. So it's an attempt to say, hey, there's a discrepancy here between Genesis 1 and Genesis 2. How can we make sense of that? Well, the way we make sense of that is, oh, that first woman, she was a feminist, and we can't have feminists, so we got to get rid of feminist Lilith. Um, and then much later, we have Eve doing Eve things. Um, but yeah, this is obviously a much later addition into the story, uh, because two different accounts of creation, it makes sense that we have two different ideas of how humanity is kind of created here.
I also love the implication, going back to being made in our image, is that there is no binary to God because God made humans in their image, which was both
Yeah.
male and female. So no sex is
Mm.
given preference. Like equality is already there. There is no difference. I don't know if that makes any sense.
Yeah, no, it's I'm sure that's another term. I don't know if we talked about this last week about the gendered language for God, because like the Hebrew Bible um, uses masculine pronouns for God, almost exclusively. There are times when God is referred to as feminine in a few cases, but mostly God is this male deity of some sort, and we even see perhaps indications that this God had a wife at some points. But yeah, the idea of it being in our image, I don't think that's an intentional insertion of a non-binary God into the text. But I get why that would be appealing to many modern readers.
Well, because the Bible has been used and abused, I would even say, to assert people's opinions on the way they think the world should work, especially with gender roles. And
Mm,
um, so I just wanted to make that little nod because everything is a
sure.
man-made construct. We're all equal. Get in line.
Yeah. Perfect.
Um, so then like he made them. Does it just say two, or did he make many people?
Probably says in my translation, I have God created mankind in his image, and the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them.
Oh, okay.
Um,
So it might have been a whole group.
yeah, again, like it's so easy to like look at this and think, oh, this is Adam and Eve. But the like again, these are two different narratives happening. Or it's not necessarily referring to Adam and Eve. This is, God making people, people doing their things. Um, so I don't think I don't think that's addressing that's I don't think that's a question that this author was necessarily concerned with.
Okay.
Um, like as we see in Genesis 2 and 3 next week, that story is much more interested in this personal God, personalized people who are like having conversations and have thoughts. Where this is a much more this idea of God is much more above and kind of like works down on humanity. Whereas next week we'll see how kind of God works with and like even walks with humanity. So we have two different notions of how the divine is uh, in these two different creation stories.
I like this one because I really enjoy, especially because like it asserts that there was like many people that were created at the same time. And I've always felt very uncomfortable with the Adam and Eve story because it's like mother and father of
Mm.
humanity, like it just the genetics of it all.
Yeah, again, it's
Really
not history,
unsettling.
Jody.
I
Yeah.
understand that, but the implications, that's the way my brain works. And
Yeah.
sometimes things just don't go together. And that is me and the Adam and Eve story. Not a vibe. But we'll see next week.
Yeah.
So then he says, bear fruit
But yeah.
and become many.
Okay, and this I think is kind of another nod towards some Babylonian creation myths, who see humanity as very negative and very noisy. One of the big complaints of the gods in the Babylonian creation myths is how noisy these pesky little humans are. Um, and in this idea to bear fruit and become many, it's kind of you know against the grain of the Babylonian creation myths. So I think that's kind of an intentional addition there. Like, hey, be fruitful and multiply and do your thing. I think it's very intentional.
Okay. All right.
But yeah,
So,
any more thoughts on day 6?
nope. Not a
So,
thought. I was really hoping for a Lilith something, but we'll get to her later. So he went to bed. He woke up. He said, "Ah, 'tis day 7."
it is indeed.
Is and he saw it and he thought it's good. It's chill. Yeah.
No, he doesn't say it's good. Does God say it's good? God blessed the seventh day.
Oh.
So God may not have said the seventh day was good, but he blessed it. So, I count that as it being good.
Yeah. It's not a very good.
Oh,
Like
yeah.
it's a blessing.
But yeah, we here have like the creation of Sabbath, which the holy day in Judaism, uh, and it makes sense in the Exodus version of the Ten Commandments. You shall keep the Sabbath as one of the commandments, and the reason given is because on the seventh day God rested. In the Deuteronomy version of the Ten Commandments, we don't see that. We see the reason for the Sabbath as because you were once slaves in Egypt. So there's differences in different authors, but the idea that Earth was created in 6 days, and then God rested is given reason for the Sabbath day of rest, which we see even today.
Yes. So All
Content.
calendars should
Right.
start on Sunday. That's all I'm hearing. Because Connor, his calendar starts on Monday, and I think that is wild. That is nutso. I have very strong opinions on calendar start dates.
Sure. No, it's valid.
The last day should always be Saturday.
Ugh. But yeah, do you have
And
any other?
ooh, well, I was going to say, doesn't this also lend itself to the need for creation of sacred time since there was no temple?
Yeah, yeah. No, definitely. It's this, intensification of a holy day, creating a sacred time for sure. I think that also indicates that this was written, after the destruction of the temple, for sure.
So just so I'm clear, the religion was already going and this got written.
Yeah, yeah. So, well, like we don't. I can't off the top of my head think of a religion that started with writings and then became a religion. Most of
Okay.
it starts with tradition and people, and then you create these writings to like create a sense of unity and like understanding. Because like most like the reason we tie religions to books is because the religions us as Americans are most familiar with is Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. All of those have a sacred central text, but outside of those three, it's fairly rare to have a central text like that. Hinduism, Buddhism, most Eastern religions don't really have the centralized texts. They have texts that are important and texts that they refer to, but nothing that they would necessarily deem as an equal to how Christians would see the Bible or Muslims would see the Quran. So it's a very, very, I don't like the term, but it's a very Abrahamic view of how religion would work.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure I had that correct because I don't know
Yeah.
why. I just assumed the book was written before it.
Yeah. No, and it makes sense because like this is what, so many people are like, here's the book. This explains the religion. It would make sense that this would be the first thing.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. I see this. I say this is good.
This is good.
This is
And we
good.
made the podcast and it is good.
And tell your friends it is
Perfect.
good.
It is good. Um, amen. But yeah, any last thoughts?
Um, no, not that I want to say out loud. Maybe on Fortnite later. They're wild.
Perfect.
But no, for this, like, oh, I did want to say there is some symmetry to how the days are presented, right?
Mhm.
Because day one,
Yeah.
you expand because I heard this from you. I don't want to take your thing.
No, so day one we have the creation. I think I mentioned this. We have the creation of light um, and darkness, and those are separated, and that's filled in by the things on day four of the stars and the sun and stuff like that. And then day two we have the firmament separating the waters above and the waters below, and that's filled in by the things created on day five of the fishes and the birds. And then day six we have the creation of animals and humans and stuff, and that fills in the place created on day three of the dry land. So no, it's a very tight prose here, and it's very intentional, very poetic. When I translated this, I translated it as if it were a poem. It's not a poem. It's very tight prose, but I think I shared that translation with you, and the reason I formatted it that way was to kind of emphasize the poetic nature of it, even though I don't think this is a poem. It's just very very tight prose,
I enjoyed
and
reading
that's
it
not
as
really debated by.
I enjoyed reading it as a poem.
But
I
yeah,
have to
no,
say
it's a
it
fun.
was gorgeous to read it as a poem because like that symmetry is just it's it tickles a little part of my brain that's like, oh yeah, day one got filled in
Mm,
by day four, day two by day
yeah,
five. Like it's very nice, neat, tight, compact, and
definitely.
it speaks to me. So 2 thumbs up.
Perfect. Well, awesome. To all our viewers out there, please, comment and like and review or do whatever it is that people do to podcasts. Follow us on social media. On Twitter, we're the Rel Treehouse. We're having a blast on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. We're on it all. It's gonna be a blast.
Expect no TikTok dances, but snippets from the podcast to make you laugh.
Perfect. All right. Bye, all.
Bye, guys. Thank you for joining us.